Hello everyone. Thank you all for being here today. I am Harry Richards. I am the director of Santi. And today I'm here to talk a little bit about this short film and also, why we made the film and how it forms a part of a much longer form project, a 90-minute feature film that is set between the UK and Colombia. So I thought I would just start by kind of talking you through a little bit about why we made the film and where the idea came from. So I lived in Colombia in 2018 for my year abroad as part of my Spanish and history course at the University of Edinburgh. I had to spend a year living in a Spanish-speaking country, so I chose to divide that year into two. I spent 6 months working for a newspaper in Bogota, in Colombia, and I spent the other 6 months working for a production company in Mexico City. And while I was out in Colombia, what I found is that actually I started to feel quite isolated. Even though I had good friends and lots of very welcoming people around me, what I really struggled with was getting my head around not just the language, but also the cultural differences and the jokes, the laughter, the way that people interacted with one another. And it was very different from the way that we, from British humour and the way that we interact here in the UK. Quite quickly, what I realised was there was also a lot of similarities in the way that we interact as people, but I thought that difference in culture and the nuances of how those relationships change when you're in a different place was a really interesting starting point for a film. So when I came back to the UK for my 4th year in Edinburgh, I was already concocting ideas to make a film about this story. And I thought, okay, I don't really want to make a story about a white British guy living in South America. I think that's a story that doesn't need to be told, and perhaps something that we've seen on screen before. But what I felt was a more interesting angle was actually flipping that on its head and looking at what it might feel like to be a Colombian person living in London. And so I started speaking to some of my Colombian friends, particularly my friend Marvin, who came to London during the pandemic. He was only meant to be here for a few weeks, and because of lockdown, he ended up being here for 9 months. And so we discussed these ideas that I had had about cultural isolation, and what we found is that it was this very universal theme that he had already experienced in just a few weeks of living in London. And some of the moments that you see in this film, particularly the moment in the bathroom where the English guys are asking him about cocaine and they're sort of expecting Santi to be this party animal, those are based on real interactions that my friend Marvin had when he went to house parties in London. And what was really interesting was to start to unpack the presumptions that a lot of British people have about Colombians and Latin Americans living in London. Anyway, so I thought, it would be a really interesting film set between the UK and Colombia, where we see this character go on a journey from his hometown in Colombia to living in London. And I had all these big ideas about filming it across these two countries, but at that stage, I'd only made 2 short films. And so what I thought is that, okay, I need to prove to people that this film, A, is relevant and important, but also that I've got the skills to be able to deliver a film of this scale. And so I started speaking to people in the industry. I went and met different business executives from the film industry. And one of them said to me in quite a funny encounter where he got me around to his house and he was doing the dishwasher while we were chatting, but he said, Harry, I think you need to boil this idea down to one scene. You need to think, how can you convey all of the ideas that you have and give a really strong sense of this character in a 10-minute scene that you can get as many people to watch as possible. And that will become your proof of concept. And this was something that stuck with me. And I then saw the potential for how a 10-minute film could be used as a kind of calling card for a much bigger piece. And so what we then started doing, me and Marvin, the executive producer, is starting to think about our crew. How do we actually create this 10-minute film? So I then brought on a British producer called Stan Hall, and he and I worked together to figure out the budget for this film. And we figured that we probably needed about £7,000 to make it. And that was to make it with really high quality kit, shooting in London, and using the right number of people to make this at a high level. Because what we knew is that in order to attract these, hopefully, investors further down the line, and to show that we could make a 90-minute film about this subject, we knew that we needed to make something that looked really, really smart, and it had to sell this production value. So by production value, I mean really good camera, really good lighting, really good lenses, and strong editing, and strong sound design as well. So we put together this budget of £7,000, and we then went out and fundraised for that. So we went to all sorts of friends, family. We harnessed the power of our networks to raise that £7,000. And we were getting contributions of all sorts of sizes, from £5 to £100 to £1,000. And for the slightly bigger contributions, we created a pitch deck where we would present to people that we thought were in a position to give a little bit more money, so in the region of £500 to £1,000. And myself, the producer, and our first assistant director, we went out and we pitched to these people, and over the course of a couple of months, we managed to raise the £7,000 we needed. And we actually ended up raising an extra £3,000, which then went towards the film's marketing and distribution. So taking it out to film festivals and showing it at as many screenings as possible. And so, making this film, we then, took it to film festivals, and critically, we showed it at 21 universities around the UK. And this was really, really important, because what I knew that we needed to prove to potential investors and financiers further down the line to go and make that feature film was that there was a clear audience, and there were people that cared about this subject and really connected with the subject matter. Because to make a film, it's so much effort, it's so much time, and it's so much money that there really needs to be a very strong reason for making it. And in this case, there was quite a clear social impact. It was what we were trying to do is we were trying to shed light on Latin Americans living in London, and through that, give a voice to all people around the world that have experienced that feeling of isolation in a new culture. So for me, that was when I first moved to Colombia. For Santi, it's when he first moved to London. But what we found on that university tour and throughout our screenings was that people from all sorts of different cultures had faced this, and they were really connecting with the film, talking about their experiences, and they felt seen by what we had done in this 10 minutes. And that for us was really, really important, because it meant that we could then go and speak to people in the industry in the UK and financiers and say, hey, look, there is an audience for this film. There are people that really care about seeing a longer version of this story. And so that gave us the momentum for me to then go back to Colombia and begin researching more thoroughly a 90-minute film version. The reason that I'm here and that I made the film is because I also have that intersection of interests. On the one hand, I'm really passionate about film, but I'm also really passionate about the intersection of culture and how that can create really special projects. So I mean, just to touch a little bit more on the fundraising for the short film, because I know that a couple of you were quite interested to hear more about that. So what was really important when we made the decision to start pitching for the fundraising for the short was boiling down the ideas as much as possible. So really thinking about what was the core of the idea, and then being able to demonstrate to the people we were pitching to that we could deliver this on budget and on time. So we worked very closely with a first assistant director, and for anyone that doesn't know, that is the person that puts together a schedule for the shoot. And we knew that in order to do this for £7,000, sounds like a lot, but when you are using very expensive kit and crew and paying for a location, suddenly that money goes quite quickly. So we knew that we had to be as efficient as possible when we were filming the short. And that meant doing everything within 1 day of filming. So we did 1 day rehearsal and then 1 day of filming. So we shot the 10-minute film in 1 day. And that's because we could only hire the kit for a certain amount of time. And we knew that if we went over that, then people would not be able to continue working on the project, and we would have to pay for further days' worth of kit. So essentially being as prepared as possible was really important in getting that short off the ground, and being able to prove to the financiers that we would actually be able to deliver a film once they had given us the money. Because the last thing that they want is that they spend the money and that you then don't have enough to actually make it, or you don't deliver on your promise to make it. So coming into this short film, I had also made 2 short films before. So in my final year of school, I made a little short film on my phone for no money, just using my friends as actors, my family. And so that was a first way that I started to convince people that I was maybe worth giving a little bit of money to. And then for my second short film, so when I was in my second year at Edinburgh University, this was a film called Glass People. Again, I was making it with lots of my friends. No one was getting paid for it, but we raised just enough money. So we raised about £1,000 to pay for a camera, to pay for locations. But a lot of that film was done on favours. So the position that a few of you in this room are at now, at university, I would say that is a prime time for really making a film where you're working together with people that also want to get into the industry. And it's a really great opportunity to create a piece of work that then once you leave university, you can show to people and say, hey, look, I'm passionate, I can deliver a project, and I'm now worth investing in. And so then when I left Edinburgh University, we made this film in the 6 months after I left. And we were working with lots of graduates from different universities around the country that all shared an interest in film, but also in cultural collaboration. So we had a lot of Colombian people working on the film. We had lots of people that had spent time in South America. And that kind of shared love of the subject matter and what we were doing was what helped us to deliver this short film. It's really important whenever you're making a project like this that is really a passion project, that you are finding people that you connect with and that really firmly believe in what you're doing. With Santi, again, we weren't able to pay anyone with the £7,000. We were all working for free. We were all volunteers on the film. And again, that's why we only had 2 days to do it, because we were all doing it on our weekend when we were taking time off from our full-time jobs to make it. And what we saw is that because of how committed people were to this subject, that we were able to deliver something of quite high quality. Once we had made the short film, I knew that I needed to get back to Colombia to start thinking about how do we actually turn this short film into a 90-minute feature film. I had already started thinking about the rough brushstrokes of the feature film story, but I knew that there was still quite a lot of work to be done to make sure that this story was as engaging as possible. And a bit like what you at the back there touched on, it was crucial, as with the short film, that we were doing this from a really authentic point of view. So I felt, I can't be making a film about a young Colombian man without the involvement of Colombian production companies. So I went back out to Colombia, and in order to do that, I got myself a job working at a PR company in Colombia that would allow me to live there for 7 months. And while I was there, I was attending film festivals, I was going and setting up meetings with production companies, and I was visiting some of the Colombian locations where I imagined the Colombian part of this feature film taking place. The first thing I did, practically the day I got off the plane, was went to this film festival called Bogotá. This is the Bogotá Short Film Festival. And it's one of the few film festivals in the world that really celebrates short films and nothing else. There are a lot of film festivals that celebrate short films, but they are mainly there for feature films, for 90-minute plus films. But this film festival was just for shorts. And so what you found was there was this pool of incredibly passionate young people who were all at a similar point in their careers, looking to meet others, to connect with other filmmakers, and start developing their portfolio of work. While I was literally in the queue for the bathroom at this film festival, I met a young man called Andrés. We got chatting. As it turned out, he had he was a producer. He had similar interests in the themes of cultural isolation. And we got talking, and we then became very good friends. And what then later transpired is that Andrés had a production company that was based in Colombia, and little did I know at the time that he had already made 2 TV shows, and he had made his first feature film. So he was the perfect person for me to bring on board because he had more experience than I did, and he had shot lots of work in Colombia. And so he would be a fantastic partner for me to work with to help get this project off the ground. So about 6 months later, I said to him, I was like, Andrés, I'd love you to come on board as exec producer. And what that meant is that he then helped me to develop the Santi feature film story. So really thinking about the story beats, the plot, the structure, the themes, adding different nuances and different layers to the story to make it more engaging and to really make it work as a commercial film. Because what's really, really important is that obviously these films have got to have a social impact. They've got to be relevant, they've got to resonate with a lot of people, but ultimately films get financed by people because they believe that the film can make them some money. And this is the business side of the industry that you don't really have to think about so much when you're making your first short films. But as you grow and as you start to make films with a much higher budget, you have to be much more attuned to this. So all of the work that Andrés and I were doing on the Santi story was making it as compelling as possible with the end goal in mind of how are we going to get the most number of people to connect with this story, because what that then means is more ticket sales further down the line when the film eventually ends up in cinemas. So that's getting a bit ahead of myself, but thinking about the film's distribution and the audience potential of a film from a really early stage was super important. Once Andrés and I had built the story outline for the feature film, we then started discussing how we were actually going to finance this feature. So in the UK, we have the British Film Institute, which is a public funding source of money. and they give money to first-time feature filmmakers to help get their projects off the ground. However, it's incredibly, incredibly competitive. So the quality of your materials has to be super high. We knew that we had to submit a story outline, so a 10-page document of the whole story, a budget, and a list of the characters and a plan for production, so how we were going to execute this film that was set between Colombia and the UK. Also, Andres, being Colombian, he taught me that there were lots of public funding sources out in Colombia. So because the British Film Institute was so competitive, we thought that by applying to 2 different sources of funding, that would double our chances of getting the finance. So at this stage, we were applying to funds that were called the Development Fund. And this is applying for finance to allow you to develop a project up to the point of production. And so we submitted to both, and we got rejected from both. And that is the reality of hundreds of thousands of filmmakers around the world, that you will apply to these funds and you will get rejected, and you then have to figure out another way of getting it off the ground. But what it does when you get that rejection is it really forces you to think about why it's not working. You will usually get feedback from them, and it refines your thinking and focuses you so that you understand exactly how you need to change your approach to push the project along further. So at that stage, we brought on another Colombian producer called Maria Luisa Meneses Prado, and I was introduced to her because she was from the town where the character of Santi is from. I chose this town because it's where I spent a lot of time when I first was in Colombia, and it's a very special place right up in the northeast of the country near the Venezuelan border, completely different to London. So I thought having this visual contrast on screen between these completely different locations would be very interesting for the viewer and create more of a juxtaposition on screen between the 2 different cultures. But in order to authentically portray this small town on screen, we needed someone that really understood that culture, not just the general Colombian culture, but the culture of that town, how it operates, the people there, the language, the idiosyncrasies. And so Maria Luisa, she came on board and she took me to Ocaña. And we went together, we flew there from Medellin, and then we got a 10-hour bus right up to the town. And I then spent a month in Ocaña, meeting lots of different people, speaking to them about their experiences, and starting to understand kind of how life in Ocaña operates. And it was at this stage that we started to realize that maybe the film was missing something that was going to make it resonate with people right now. And so we started to, between the 3 of us, Andres, Malu, and myself, we started to think about what other theme we could work into this story. And a lot of what was coming up when we were speaking to people, and something that we were all very personally interested in, was the theme of sexuality, and how in Colombia that is treated slightly different to the UK, but also how it's very nuanced and how there are lots of different similarities. And so we started interviewing people about sexuality, their experiences of living abroad, their experiences of living in Ocaña, and gradually we started to construct a story that we found was much more exciting and interesting and rooted critically in the experiences again of real people. So at the end of that month of all sorts of crazy adventures, a lot of motorbike rides and trips up into the mountains around this town, I then had to get back to the paper and actually start reconstructing this story. And so with Malu and Andres' advice, started putting together these ideas, and we started putting together a budget and really thinking about how we were going to get this feature film off the ground. But at this stage, it still felt like there was just something missing that was going to get us to a point where we were able to convince financiers that we were ready to make this feature film. And we were starting to discuss the amount of money we would need to make this 90-minute film that's set between two countries with a massive cast, lots of international travel, and suddenly we're thinking, oh my God, we're going to probably need upwards of £1 million, which for a feature film anyway is considered a micro budget. And so we were starting to have conversations where we would say, okay, hang on a minute. So I've raised £10,000 for my previous short film, and the next jump that we are going to make is a jump to £1 million. And that, even as we were starting to have that conversation, we realized that actually, if we even get into a room with a financier, we're going to get laughed out of that room. Because they're going to say, well, hang on a minute, you've only done a short film for £10,000, how are you going to manage it if we give you £1 million? And it was at this point that I was lucky enough to receive a script while I was still in Colombia for a completely different film, for another short film. And I thought my head was so involved in getting this Santi short film turning it into a feature. And when I was sent this short screenplay, I thought, oh God, I'm really not sure if I have time for this. I need to be moving forward with the feature film. But as soon as I read it, not only did I really connect with the material, but I realized that it provided me with an opportunity to create a much bigger budget short film that I could use all the skills that I developed while making the Santi short and create something on an even higher production value that would convince to investors that I was comfortable as a director and as a producer too of working with a much larger sum of money. This is a film that is now titled Contact Hours, and this is a film that we made last year in London. So I went back to London to make this short film. It was not something that I anticipated. It was not part of my plan for my filmmaking trajectory. But what we saw is that pulling together the skills of lots of different people that were now slightly further along in their careers. We used the same first assistant director that we used on Santi, which I should say that short film was made 3 years ago now. And so we pulled together our crew again, and we went out and we raised £45,000 to make this short film. And that for us was a big jump. But we were going back to the same people, a lot of the same people that gave us £1,000 for Santi, and they gave us £10,000 to make Contact Hours. We made the film in the UK in the summer last year, and we then launched the film to 700 people in person in London, and we are now on a university tour and a film festival tour around the world. And the writer and I just got back from Berlin Film Festival. We're going out to Cannes Film Festival in May. And what we've been able to do with this film is build our profiles enough to be able to get back in the room with the financiers that we previously thought were out of reach. And so I've now since then set up a production company, and when we go in and meet with financiers, we say, these are the short films that we've made, this is the feature film that we would like to do next. And they can see that because we're starting to work with larger amounts of money, that we are getting closer to being able to raise and manage £1 million, which is the cost that we need to make the Santi feature film. So all of that is to say that if you are at a point where you're not sure how to get a project off the ground, don't be opposed to putting something on pause and saying, and looking in another direction, working with other people, because ultimately all of the work you do will be building your profile. You will acquire a huge number of skills, and it will get you in rooms that previously you might not have had access to. And so while over the last year and a half while I've been making Contact Hours, Santi, the feature film, hasn't been moving as fast as I might have liked. Essentially, we're now in a stronger position than ever before to go out and pitch for that finance. So, when we are starting to think about raising that finance for the feature film, there are a number of ways that you have to pitch that. On the one hand, you're pitching to investors, so it's slightly different to short films where people are just donating their money and they're not seeing any return on investment. With a feature film, they are giving you some money and they are hoping that from the feature film's sales and distribution, so from the tickets that are sold in cinemas for that film, or from the deal that is done with Netflix or Amazon or a similar streaming platform, that investor is going to get their money back, hopefully, plus a return on their investment. So if someone were to give us, let's just use a tiny amount of money, but if they were to give us £10,000, we do a deal with them to say, if you give us this money now, when our film gets onto a streaming platform and we do that deal, you will get £12,000 back. So you'll get all of your money back at a 20% premium. And so these are the kinds of deals that are done with all sorts of different levels of money. So £10,000, £100,000, £500,000. And together with those little bits of money, I mean, not little bits of money, they're absolutely enormous, you gradually piece together the finance that you need to make the feature film. Alongside the money that you raise from these investors, who tend to be they can be from different industries, so they can be from the finance industry, but have an interest in the film you are making, or they might be within the film industry and they might be a film financier. But alongside these investors, there is also the sources of public funding, which are, again, incredibly competitive. But if you can get it, these are grants that you don't need to pay back to anyone. And then there is the tax credit. So in each country, there will be a tax credit, a tax incentive, where they want you to film in their country, and they will give you a percentage of the money you spend in that country back for doing so. So, as the producers of Santi, the feature film, and I have started to think about how to raise that money, we are exploring. We know that in the UK there's now a 40% tax credit, which means that all of the scenes and all of the shots that we do in the UK, for all of the money that we spend on our crew, our kit, our locations, we will get 40% of that back. What that means, it's all a bit confusing, but it means that essentially we only have to raise, in theory, 2/3 of £1 million, because the other portion of that money can be loaned to us by a film financier that loans against the tax credit. So they will give us the money knowing that they will definitely get that money back. So really, these producers that I'm working with are absolutely brilliant because they can help us apply for the tax credit in Colombia and also the public funding sources of money over there in a way that we, as a British production company, cannot. So while myself and my business partner, we will be applying for the funding that is based in the UK, and we will be working with accountants here in the UK to secure that tax credit, our producers in Colombia do exactly the same, but over there. And so what you're seeing is that having access to both the Colombian sources of money and the British source of money is helping us to piece together that budget in a faster way. And so you're not just getting this cultural collaboration on the actual story, but you're actually finding this co-production where both sides of the coin, both cultures, are just as invested in getting this project off the ground. and are going after the money, and you're doubling your chances of getting that money in place. The final thing that I will say, just on that previous slide before jumping onto this, is that post-production is something that is often also not given a lot of thought to. So for anyone that doesn't know, post-production is the period of making a film when you've finished shooting it and you now go and edit the film, you do the sound, the music, the colour, and you pull all of the different parts of the film together. And this is absolutely crucial in making sure that the film looks and sounds as high quality as possible. Because when you're thinking about selling that film, the only reason that, or one of the few reasons why Netflix or Amazon might buy your film is because it looks like a serious piece of cinema. And a lot of that is done during post-production. So, when we've been thinking about the post-production for Santi, the feature film, we've been thinking, okay, where can we make sure that the post-production is A, done at the highest quality, but also is done, hopefully, not to an extortionate budget. And so we've decided that we will be doing the post-production for Santi, the feature film, out in Colombia, because 60% of the film is actually spoken in Spanish. So we need people who are working on the film that really understand the intricacies of the dialogue and what the people are saying. Because if you imagine a sound designer from the UK that doesn't speak Spanish, suddenly having to edit all the dialogue together, get the pacing of the humour and the jokes and the laughter, and mould that together with the sound and the other sound effects in the film, they're not going to be able to do that if they don't fully understand what those people are saying. So again, it comes back to this idea that in order to create a film that is of a really high quality, if you're making a film that is set between two different countries, you really need people that either speak both languages, or you need enough people on your team that speak either language, because that is enabling them to work at their best. It's giving them a deep understanding of the subject, but it's also ensuring that when they're in the room doing their work, whether it's the edit, the sound, the music, the colour grade, they are absolutely able to work at the top of their game, and therefore that enables us to create a piece of work that we can then go and sell further down the line. So, creating a long-term cultural impact, this is the most important thing that you want to keep in mind whenever you are building your film. And the life of your film really depends on the level that people connect with it. And so when you're starting to think about marketing and distributing your film, by this point, hopefully, you have got a really good script that you've got them filmed, you've executed it with the right people. So in this case, we hope to execute it with lots of Colombian people, lots of English people that really understand the story. And then, once we finish making the film, we then have to go and market and distribute it to the world. That's not just us as the filmmakers. We would work with a film distributor. So some of you might have heard of Mubi, and they are an independent film distributor that work with filmmakers, tends to be sort of first or second time filmmakers. They do a lot of international feature films, and they are distributing films to an international audience. So between the filmmakers and the film distributor, you have to find ways to make sure that as many people as possible see your film. The first step in that journey is launching the film through screenings and events, getting people in rooms, watching the film, talking about it, connecting with it, listening to Q&As, understanding why the film is made. And the reason that these events are really important from a business point of view is because if you do a good job with your film and with the Q&A afterwards, all of those people are then going to go and speak to their friends about your film and say, you've got to watch this short film or you've got to watch this feature film. And all of those people are then going to go and seek out a screening for themselves. And so begins this cycle of people going to screenings, buying tickets to watch your film, and more people will then have not just seen it, but they will have purchased a ticket, and so the money that your investors are hoping to see come back will slowly come back to them through every ticket that is sold. And what you're doing as well is you're building a profile for your film. So you're showing that all of the money and the time and the energy that people have invested, whether it's just in one country or around the world, was worth it because it's connecting with people on a much bigger scale. And so once you've done the screenings and events, there's also all sorts of interviews and press that you can be doing. So on my latest short film, which we are promoting at the moment, we've spoken to all sorts of media publications like The Independent, Metro, Variety. So these are publications that are national news publications, but also industry publications. And so you want to be connecting with people with any piece of work that you make that are interested in the film for its filmmaking, but also for its themes. And so identifying your audience groups is really, really important. And this is something that you want to be doing from a really early stage, because later down the line, when a film distributor or an investor is looking at your project and trying to understand whether it's worth their time, worth their energy, and worth their money pushing your film forward and investing in it, they want to know that there is a clear audience there that this film is going to resonate with. So in this case, our audience is British people, Spanish-speaking people, Colombian people, Latin American people, and by having these two cultures in the film, we're able to reach a much wider audience than a film might be if it was just set in one country. And obviously what we see is then by reaching these two different audiences, we're also able to offer a window into these two different cultures to people around the world. And then once you've identified kind of what nationality might be interested in watching your film, you've also got to look at age group. So we say in this film that our target audience is younger people that are coming of age, at a similar rhythm to Santi, our protagonist, but also older people can connect with it as well because they have been through this journey themselves. And we all have that period of our lives where we are coming of age, where we are starting to understand our identity, our sexuality, and who we are as people. And so we believe that this film resonates with both younger audiences and older audiences. And being able to prove that to investors and anyone you speak to about your film is really, really important. This is probably the most important slide. So I came into this industry as a creative, as a director, and I thought I'm just, someone that loves making little videos, little films. I love films because they look beautiful, because the lighting's amazing, the camera work's amazing, the music's brilliant, the sound's brilliant, the performances are great. But what I quite quickly realized is that you have to think like a businessman, and that if you seriously want to see your film get off the ground, and you're not just going to sit around waiting for other people to do it for you, you have to think of this as a business. You have to think about how can we find a way to make what you want to make as a creative commercially relevant and commercially viable. There has to be a clear business plan in place for you to be able to prove to financiers that it is worth them giving you money. And this is relevant for any short film you make, any feature film. It will always come back to being able to demonstrate that your film is going to be relevant, it's going to be important, and that people are going to see it. You really want to be thinking about, what do audiences want to see? Why do they want to see it? And how can you ensure that your film connects with people? I would always refrain from suggesting to people that you should be thinking about what the market wants and thinking about going into a project and creating it just because it's what you think people will like. Go with your gut and write something or work with people that have written something that they really care about, and that will guarantee that you will find other people who also care about it in your collaborators, in your audience. But really what you want to be doing is connecting what you want to make, what you can see there is potentially also an interest for in the wider world. For context, with my last short film, for example, Contact Hours, the one that I mentioned we made last year in the UK for £45,000, that was a film that I came on board with because I saw that there was potential for it to connect with a huge number of people. And this is because the film, it's got quite a sad theme to it. It's about student suicide. And there was a personal reason for me being involved in that at my university, we very sadly lost a number of people in my year to suicide. And it was the same for the writer. And the more research we did, we saw that this was a universal issue around UK universities. And so the reason that we were then able to go out and raise £45,000 is because there were so many other people that cared about this issue. And so not only were we making this film because we deeply cared about it, but we knew it was something that we could get off the ground because there were other people that cared about it. It was something that was in the media already. There was an interest in this subject. We knew that we were going to be able to get press coverage about this film. Obviously, nothing is certain, but you want to be able to know that when you embark on a project and you start making a film that is a huge amount of work, that there's a strong chance that people are going to want to see it, the press is going to want to be able to speak about it and talk to you about it and interview about it. And there are going to be people that once you finish making your film, want to come and see that film. And all of those things then helps to get you to your ultimate goal, which is delivering the message of your film to the widest number of people possible. And so that was something that we thought about with Contact Hours, with Santi, the short film, and we are constantly thinking about with Santi, the feature film. So to sum up, the work you make must be relevant and important, otherwise it will not get made. It might not start, you might have written something and you might not know quite how it's relevant yet, but developing that script and working with collaborators, so producers, co-writers, sending that material out to people that have been out and made films before, will help you identify whether this project is relevant, whether it is important, and if it's not relevant and important yet, how to get it to a point that it is. And once you believe that your film achieves both of those things, you stand a really good chance of getting that film financed and getting it made. Thank you, everyone.